In the sun-drenched hills of Arizona Territory, 1886, a young woman's delicate hands could churn butter at dawn and split a feather with a bullet at 100 yards by dusk. Eleanor Ellie Hawkins had mastered her father's Winchester rifle before. She could properly write her name, but when the infamous Raven's Claw gang rode onto her homestead, they saw nothing but another pretty face in a cotton dress. That mistake would cost them everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted the Copper Valley in shades of amber and gold as Eleanor Hawkins completed her morning chores, her movements revealing the easy grace of someone raised on hard work and discipline. At 23, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that turned heads whenever she visited Prosperity, the nearest settlement to her family's homestead. But it was her other talent, the one carefully concealed beneath faded calico dresses and practical leather boots, that truly set her apart. Inside the Hawkins' sturdy adobe farmhouse, medals and certificates lay carefully wrapped in oilskin, tucked away in a cedar trunk beneath winter quilts and spare linens. They bore the name of Major Jonathan Hawkins, decorated Army Scout and renowned marksman of the 3rd Cavalry, Eleanor's father. What the certificates didn't reveal was that at least half of those awards rightfully belonged to his daughter, a woman whose skill with a rifle surpassed even his legendary precision. A lady's reputation is as valuable as gold in these parts, her mother Catherine would say, adjusting Eleanor's bonnet before their monthly trips to town. Some things are best kept private. But Catherine Hawkins had been gone 2 years now, taken by the fever that swept through Copper Valley in '84, leaving Eleanor to manage the farm alongside her father until his own passing 6 months ago. Now the homestead was hers alone, along with her father's legacy and his most treasured possession, a custom Winchester Model 1876 with hand-tooled engravings and a smooth maple stock that had been modified specifically for her grip. The rifle hung above the stone fireplace, its brass fittings catching the morning light that streamed through the open windows. Eleanor glanced at it as she moved through her morning routine, measuring coffee into the battered enamel pot. The weapon was as much a part of her as her own heartbeat, though few besides her father had ever witnessed what she could do with it. In Prosperity, she was simply Ellie Hawkins, that quiet girl who made the finest embroidery work at the county. Fair and somehow kept her father's farm running after his passing. Most folks wondered how long she'd hold out before accepting one of the many marriage proposals that came her way. A woman alone on a homestead was considered a tragedy waiting to happen in these parts. Sheriff Malcolm Reed was one of the few who knew her secret. He'd been there the day 12-year-old Eleanor had outshot every man at the territorial fair, competing under her father's name while wearing boys' clothes and her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Now, occasionally he called on her skills discreetly when situations required a steady hand and a sharp eye. "Your father taught you well," he'd say, careful never to speak of it where others might hear. "Shame the army doesn't take women. You'd have made one hell of a scout." This morning, like every morning since her father's passing, Eleanor had risen before dawn. The farm wouldn't run itself, and appearances had to be maintained, especially for a woman living alone. She'd fed the chickens, milked the cows, and checked the irrigation channels that kept her small orchard alive in the Arizona heat. All while keeping one ear tuned to the road that wound through Copper Valley, rumors had been circulating about the Raven's Claw gang moving east from the California territories, leaving a trail of robbed banks and grieving widows in their wake. They were said to be led by the notorious Isaiah Black Eye Blackwood, a man whose reputation for cruelty matched his skill with a Colt revolver. 3 days ago, Sheriff Reed had stopped by under the pretense of bringing her mail. "They hit the bank in Silver Springs," he'd said quietly, helping her repair a broken fence post. Killed 2 men. Word is they're heading this way, following the old stage route. Might be looking to lie low for a spell in the Arizona backcountry. His eyes had drifted to the rifle above the fireplace. Might be we'll need your particular talent soon, Miss Hawkins. Eleanor had simply nodded, continuing to hold the post steady, as if they were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. But that evening, after the sun had set and the nearest neighbor was 10 miles away, she'd taken her father's Winchester down from its place of honor. In the fading light behind the barn, she had methodically put 30 rounds through an old playing card at 75 yards, just as her father had taught her. The card, when she retrieved it, had a cluster of holes precisely through its center, none wider than a pencil's width apart. Now, as she carried a basket of fresh eggs toward the house, the sound of approaching horses made her pause. Through the morning haze, she could make out 6 riders approaching along the valley road. Their horses were dusty but well-bred, and their weapons were gleaming and well-maintained. Not the usual cowboys or travelers who occasionally passed. Through Copper Valley, Eleanor adjusted her apron and brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face, the very picture of a hard-working farm girl. But her eyes, sharp as a falcon's, had already counted weapons, noted firing positions, and marked the leader, a tall man with a distinctive black patch over his left eye and a silver-inlaid colt worn low on his hip. The Raven's Claw gang had arrived in Copper Valley, and they had no idea they were being assessed by the deadliest shot in the Arizona territory. The riders drew closer to the Hawkins homestead, their horses' hooves kicking up small clouds of dust in the dry morning air. Eleanor kept her movements deliberately unhurried as she gathered her egg basket, allowing a slight tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with appearances. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Let them underestimate you, little hawk. There's power in being unseen until the moment you choose to be seen." "Morning, miss," the leader called out, reining his horse to a stop at her gate. Up close, she could see the scar that ran from beneath his eye patch down to his jawline, a detail that matched Sheriff Reed's description of Isaiah Blackwood, the Raven's Claw gang's infamous leader. "Wondering if you might spare some water for our horses," he continued, his voice carrying the rough edges of someone accustomed to giving orders rather than making requests. "Been a long, dusty ride from California." "Of course, gentlemen," Eleanor replied, pitching her voice higher than normal, playing every bit the nervous farm girl. "The well's just there by the corral. Help yourselves." She gestured with her free hand, mentally noting how the morning sun would be in their eyes if they faced the house, a detail her father had taught her to always consider when assessing. Tactical positions. As the men dismounted, Eleanor caught fragments of their whispered conversation. Living alone. No neighbors for miles. Easy pickings. Her fingers itched to reach for the rifle inside, but she forced herself to remain still. Timing, her father always said, was as important as aim. The youngest of the gang, a lean man with sandy hair and a nervous manner, approached her directly. "Awful, dangerous for a lady to be out here all alone," he said, trying to sound worldly, but coming across as rehearsed. "Lots of bad men about these days." "Oh, I manage well enough," Eleanor answered, allowing a slight quaver in her voice. "My father taught me everything I need to know about running the farm before he passed." "Your father?" Blackwood had moved closer, his spurs jingling against the packed earth. "Would that be Jonathan Hawkins by any chance?" Eleanor clutched her egg basket tighter, letting genuine surprise show on her face. "You knew my father?" The gang leader's laugh was cold as desert night. "Knew of him, Major Jonathan Hawkins, the famous scout. Man could shoot the wings off a fly at 50 paces or so they said." His eye narrowed. "Also heard he had quite a collection of valuable items, army commendations, silver medals, and especially that fancy custom Winchester of his." The air seemed to grow thicker as the other gang members spread out in a loose circle around her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Eleanor counted the seconds between their movements, noted their positions, remembered the lessons drilled into her since childhood. Second nature, her father would say. The rifle's just an extension of your eye, your breath, your will. I'm afraid you'd be disappointed, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her deliberately hunched shoulders. The army reclaimed all official medals when he passed. Regulations, they said. It was a lie. The medals were still in their trunk, along with enough ammunition to hold off a small army. Her father had always believed in being prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Blackwood stepped closer, close enough that Eleanor could smell tobacco and trail dust on him. Now see, that's interesting because we heard different. Heard the famous Major Hawkins's collection was quite intact when he died, including that fancy presentation Winchester the army gave him. His hand drifted toward his gun. Seems to me, a young lady living alone might feel safer with some protection, for a fair price, of course. Eleanor took a step back, playing her role. I couldn't possibly— Boss! One of the other men called out. Found tracks out back of the barn. Fresh ones. Someone's been practicing their shooting. Blackwood's expression hardened. That right? Been keeping up your father's habits, have you, girl? Just scaring off coyotes, Eleanor stammered, her mind racing ahead like a chess player seeing 5 moves into the future. Father insisted I learn the basics, but I'm hardly any good. Can barely hit a fence post at 20 paces, truth. Be told. The gang leader studied her for a long moment, then smiled a predator's smile that never reached his good eye. Tell you what, why don't you show us what you can do? He pulled a playing card from his vest pocket, the ace of spades, worn and creased around the edges. Hit it at 30 paces and we'll ride on, no trouble. Miss and, well— He let the threat hang in the air. Women alone in the territories need protection after all. We'd be happy to provide it for a reasonable share of the farm's income. Eleanor let her lower lip tremble. I really couldn't. Oh, but I insist. Blackwood's hand now rested openly on his gun. Consider it a friendly competition in memory of your father. Eleanor looked around at the men surrounding her. There, faces showing various degrees of amusement and anticipation. None of them saw her as a threat, just another helpless woman alone on the frontier. It was exactly what she had spent years allowing people to believe. The morning sun climbed higher, over Copper Valley, as Eleanor Hawkins faced her unwanted visitors, the egg basket still clutched in her trembling hands. But the trembling wasn't from fear, it was from the effort of restraining herself. 6 targets, she thought clinically, all bunched together, confident in their superiority. Her father would have called it a tactical mistake of the first order. Well, girl, Blackwood held out the playing card, his scarred face twisted in a mocking smile. Surely the daughter of the famous Major Hawkins isn't afraid of a friendly shooting match. Eleanor allowed herself to flinch at his tone. I'll need a rifle, she said, her voice deliberately uncertain. Father's is inside, above the fireplace. Santiago. Blackwood nodded to the youngest gang member. Escort the lady. Make sure she doesn't try anything foolish. His hand remained on his Colt, a casual reminder of the threat beneath his words. As Eleanor led Santiago into the house, she noticed things her father had taught her to look for. How the young man's gun belt was worn too loose. How his finger twitched nervously against the holster. How his eyes darted around the room, instead of staying focused on her. Amateur mistakes, her father would have said. Mistakes that got men killed. The Winchester gleamed above the fireplace, exactly where it had hung since her father's passing. Eleanor reached for it with deliberate awkwardness, making a show of nearly dropping it. Santiago stepped forward to help, just as she'd anticipated. "Careful there, miss," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "That's a mighty fine weapon to be treating so rough." "It's heavier than I remember," Eleanor murmured, letting him take it from her hands. As he examined the rifle with obvious admiration, she used the moment to reach beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, where her father had installed a hidden compartment. Inside lay a small pouch of custom ammunition, rounds they had crafted. Together, perfectly weighted and balanced for long-range accuracy. "This is the presentation model, isn't it?" Santiago asked, running his fingers along the engraved barrel. "Father was very proud of it," Eleanor said softly, slipping a few rounds into her apron pocket. "He used to say a rifle like this was more than just a weapon. It was a responsibility." Something flickered in Santiago's young face, respect perhaps, or memory. "My pa was a rifleman too before the consumption took him. Taught me a bit, but—" He trailed off, then seemed to remember his role. His expression hardened. "Come on then, boss is waiting outside." Blackwood and his men had arranged themselves in a loose semicircle. They'd positioned the card, the ace of spades, on a fence post exactly 30 paces from where Eleanor stood. An easy shot, insultingly so. Her father had her hitting targets at 5 times that distance before she turned 14. "Now remember," Blackwood called out, "hit the card and we ride on, miss." His hand patted his gun meaningfully. "Well, let's just say we'll have to make other arrangements." Eleanor made a show of fumbling with the rifle, nearly dropping it again. "It's been so long," she said, her voice trembling. "Father would be so disappointed." The gang members laughed, crude and confident. "Maybe we should move the target closer," one suggested, triggering another round of laughter. Eleanor raised the rifle, deliberately holding it wrong. Stock not quite seated against her shoulder, stance slightly off balance. She could feel her father's voice in her head correcting her form, as he had thousands of times during their practice sessions. "Breathe, little hawk. The rifle's just an extension of your eye." She squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, splintering the fence post 6 inches to the right of the card. More laughter erupted from the gang. "Looks like you'll be needing that." "Protection after all, girl," Blackwood said, starting forward. "Now about our arrangement—" "Wait," Eleanor said quickly. "Father always said, he said I should get 3 shots for practice, please." She let her eyes fill with tears, the perfect picture of feminine distress. Blackwood paused, then spread his arms magnanimously. "Well, boys, what do you say? Should we give the lady a sporting chance?" The gang members grinned and nodded clearly, enjoying the show. Only young Santiago looked uncomfortable, still holding the ammunition box he'd carried out from the house. Eleanor took her second shot. This one hit the fence post on the left side of the card, closer, but still a clear miss. She heard more derisive comments, saw the gang members relaxing even further. Their hands had drifted away from their weapons. After all, what threat could this clumsy farm girl possibly pose? "Last chance, girl," Blackwood called out. "Better make it count." Eleanor took a deep breath, centered herself, and remembered her father's most important lesson. Sometimes, little hawk, the best shot is the one they never see coming. In one fluid motion, she shifted her stance, feet planted perfectly, rifle tucked tight against her shoulder, cheek welded to the stock. Before the gang members could register the change, she squeezed the trigger. The ace of spades didn't just fall. It exploded into precisely 3 equal pieces, the perfect shot cleaving the card along invisible lines that no random bullet could find. The morning air crackled with tension as the shredded pieces of the playing card drifted to the ground. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then Blackwood's hand flashed toward his Colt. But Eleanor was already in motion, the Winchester pivoting with fluid grace toward the gang leader. "I wouldn't," she said, her voice transformed. Gone was the trembling farm girl, replaced by something harder, forged from countless hours of practice and her father's relentless training. "I can put a bullet through your gun hand before you. Clear leather, and unlike that playing card, I won't need 3 tries." The gang members froze, their confident smirks replaced by uncertainty as they realized their situation. Eleanor Hawkins stood before them transformed, her stance perfect, her aim unwavering, every bit her father's daughter. The morning sun caught the rifle's brass fittings, making them gleam like fire. We crafted this story with great care and dedication. If you're enjoying it so far, please subscribe to our channel. It truly means a lot to us. Now let's continue with Eleanor's confrontation with the notorious Raven's Claw Gang. "You played us," Blackwood said, his scarred face twisted with rage as he stared down the barrel of Eleanor's Winchester. The shredded remains of the playing card fluttered in the morning breeze. "This whole time, my father taught me more than just shooting," Eleanor replied, keeping the rifle trained on him while remaining acutely aware of his men's positions. "He taught me that sometimes the best advantage is the one your opponent gives you themselves." Her eyes flickered to the others. "Hands where I can see them, gentlemen. Santiago, collect their gun belts." The young gang member hesitated, looking between Eleanor and his boss. In that moment of indecision, the man with a red bandana made his move. His hand dropped to his holster, but before he could grip his weapon, Eleanor's rifle cracked. The man's hat flew off his head, a neat hole punched through its crown. "That was a warning," Eleanor said calmly, the rifle already back on Blackwood. "The next one goes lower. Santiago, the gun belts, please." This time Santiago moved carefully, collecting weapons from his stunned companions. Eleanor noted how he handled the task efficiently, with a familiarity that suggested his own father had indeed taught him something about proper gun handling before the consumption took him. "You won't get away with this," Blackwood growled, though he kept his hands carefully visible. "You're just one woman. We have friends, allies all through these territories. They'll come looking." "You mean the rest of the Raven's Claw? The ones camped in Devil's Canyon?" Eleanor's question made him blink in surprise. "The ones waiting for your signal to hit the Prosperity Bank?" She allowed herself a small smile at their shocked expressions. "Did you think my father only taught me shooting? He was a scout, gentlemen, the best in the 3rd Cavalry. He taught me to read sign, to track, to observe. I've known you were coming. And for days. Sheriff Reed's been watching that canyon since yesterday," she continued. "Right about now, he and his deputies should be having an interesting conversation with your friends." This was a calculated bluff. She'd sent word to Sheriff Reed about the tracks she'd found, but hadn't received confirmation of his actions yet. Still, she'd learned from her father that confidence was often as powerful as fact. "You're bluffing," Blackwood said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Am I? The same way I was bluffing about not being able to shoot." Eleanor kept her tone level. "Santiago, once you've collected all their weapons, there's some rope in the barn, good strong hemp. We use it for breaking horses." As Santiago moved to comply, Eleanor addressed the gang again. "You men have a choice to make. The smart one would be to surrender peacefully, face the law's judgment for your crimes. The other choice—" She left the threat unspoken, letting them fill in the details themselves. "You can't watch all of us," Red Bandana snarled, his hand touching the spot where his gun should have been. "The moment you look away—" 193, Eleanor interrupted. "What? 193 consecutive bullseyes at the Army marksmanship trials in Fort Yuma, spring of '81. They thought I was my father, of course. I was wearing his coat, hat pulled low. But every one of those shots was mine." Her eyes locked onto Red Bandana's. "Would you like to test whether I've improved since then?" The revelation hit them hard. The Fort Yuma trials were legendary in shooting circles. Eleanor saw the moment. The fight went out of them, replaced by the dawning realization that they weren't facing some lucky farm girl, but rather a shooter whose skills might surpass even the famous Major Hawkins. "Your father would be proud," Santiago said quietly as he returned with the rope. There was something like admiration in his young face. "My father would say I showed off," Eleanor replied, a touch of sadness in her voice. "He always taught me, to avoid confrontation when possible. But he also taught me to finish what others start." She raised her voice slightly. "On your knees, gentlemen, hands behind your backs. Santiago, start with your boss. With the Blackwood gang secured, all except Santiago, whom Eleanor kept separate from the others, she faced a new challenge. The morning was wearing on, and Prosperity was still 12 miles away. She needed to get word to Sheriff Reed, but she couldn't risk moving the prisoners alone. "Santiago," she called, keeping her rifle trained on the others. "Bring me my father's saddlebags from the barn." The young man moved quickly, eager to prove his cooperation. Eleanor had seen something in him, a chance for redemption that reminded her of stories her father used to tell about young soldiers he'd helped guide back to the right path. "You're making a mistake trusting that boy," Blackwood said from where he knelt, his hands bound behind him. "Santiago's one of us, has been since we found him half-starved in that Texas winter." "Funny thing about trust," Eleanor replied, watching Santiago disappear into the barn. "My father always said it's like a rifle sight. You have to adjust it based on distance and conditions." She kept her voice steady, though her arms were beginning to tire from holding the rifle. "Right now, I trust Santiago more than I trust you," which isn't saying much. Red Bandana spat in the dust. "Your father ain't here, girl. All his fancy sayings won't help when—" He stopped abruptly as Eleanor's rifle shifted slightly in his direction. "When what?" she asked softly. "When the rest of your gang comes looking," he sneered. "The ones you think Sheriff Reed is watching." "Let me share another of my father's sayings," Eleanor replied, her finger steady on the trigger. "The best surprise is one you plan yourself." Before anyone could respond, a distant shot rang out from the direction of the valley road. Eleanor's rifle snapped toward the sound, but she quickly relaxed as she recognized the signal. 3 quick shots followed by a long pause, then 2 more. "Sheriff Reed's signal." "Right on time," she murmured, then raised her voice. "Over here." "Sheriff!" Sheriff Malcolm Reed rode into view, leading 4 deputies and 7 bound prisoners, the rest of the Raven's Claw gang. The sheriff's usually neat mustache was dusty from the ride, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he took in the scene before him. "Well now, Miss Hawkins," he said, dismounting smoothly. "Seems you've been busy this morning." He nodded to Blackwood. "Isaiah Blackwood. Been wanting to have a word with you about that mess in Silver Springs." "Sheriff," Eleanor acknowledged, finally allowing her rifle to lower slightly. "I see you found their camp." "Just where you said it would be," Reed confirmed. He turned to his deputies. "Boys, secure these gentlemen with the others. We'll need the wagon from town to transport them all." As the deputies moved to comply, Santiago emerged from the barn with the saddlebags. He stopped short at seeing the new arrivals, but Eleanor gestured him forward. "It's all right, Santiago. Bring them here." The sheriff raised an eyebrow at her treatment of the young gang member, but said nothing. He'd known Eleanor long enough to trust her judgment. From the saddlebags, Eleanor withdrew a packet of papers, carefully detailed maps and notes about the Raven's Claw gang's movements that she'd been compiling for weeks. "Their whole operation," she explained, handing the papers to Reed. "Routes, hideouts, caches, everything I could piece together from tracking them and listening to travelers' gossip." "You've been planning this," Blackwood said, comprehension dawning on his scarred face. "All of it, the frightened farm girl act, the missed shots. The frightened farm girl is what everyone in Prosperity expects to see," Eleanor replied. "It's amazing what people will say around someone they don't consider a threat." She turned back to the sheriff. "There's more. They weren't just planning to rob the bank. Show him, Santiago." The young man hesitated, then reached into his vest and withdrew a folded paper. "Full plans for hitting the 3 banks at once," he said quietly. "Prosperity, Silver Springs, and Fort Benson. They had men placed in each town for weeks, learning patterns, making friends with bank staff." Reed whistled softly as he reviewed the plans. This would have been the biggest heist in territorial history. He looked at Santiago thoughtfully. "You're being mighty helpful, son." "Santiago's been looking for a way out for months," Eleanor said before the young man could respond. "Haven't you, Santiago? That's why you left those tracks by my barn 2 days ago, clear as signposts to anyone who knew how to read them. You wanted to be caught." The young man's shoulders slumped in relief at having his secret finally spoken aloud. "They killed a bank clerk in Silver Springs," he said softly. "It wasn't supposed to happen. Blackwood said no killing, but then Cutter got trigger-happy and—" He shook his head. "I tried to leave after that, but they said they'd hunt me down." "Nobody's hunting you now, son," Reed said, but his eyes were on Eleanor. "Miss Hawkins, I don't suppose you'd be interested in a deputy's badge. Territory could use a shot like you." Eleanor shook her head, smiling. "My place is here, Sheriff. The farm needs me." She paused, then added, "But if you're looking for new deputies, might I suggest someone who knows the gang's operations from the inside? Someone young enough to learn a better way?" Santiago's head snapped up, hope warring with disbelief on his face. Red Bandana laughed harshly. "You're both fools. This ain't one of them dime novel stories where everything works out. Neat and pretty. Real life ain't like that." "No," Eleanor agreed, thinking of her father's lessons, of long hours practicing in secret, of years playing a role while keeping her skills sharp. "Real life is harder. Messier. That's why we need people willing to take chances on doing what's right." The gathering clouds that had been building over Copper Valley finally released their burden, sending the first fat raindrops pattering onto the dusty ground around them. It seemed fitting somehow, a cleansing rain washing away the morning's violence. "We should get these men to town before the storm breaks," Reed said, glancing at the darkening sky. "Miss Hawkins, might I suggest you come with us? I don't like the idea of you staying out here alone tonight." Eleanor opened her mouth to object. She'd been alone for months, but something in the sheriff's expression made her pause. There was concern there, yes, but also something else. Respect, perhaps. Not for the quiet farm girl she pretended to be, but for the woman with the rifle who'd captured the most notorious gang in the territory. "I appreciate the concern, Sheriff," she said finally, "but I need to see to my animals before the storm hits. I'll follow along once everything's secured." Reed nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Eleanor Hawkins would do things her own way in her own time. "We'll send a wagon back for you then. And Miss Hawkins, there's likely to be quite a commotion when word spreads about what happened here today." Eleanor glanced toward the horizon, where lightning flickered among the gathering clouds. "I suspect there will be, Sheriff. But I've weathered storms before." As the deputies began moving the prisoners toward town, Santiago lingered behind, uncertainty written across his young face. "Miss Hawkins," he began hesitantly, "what you said about me becoming a deputy, was that real, or just something to say in front of the others?" Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "My father believed that a person should be judged by the choices they make when those choices are hardest. You made yours when you left those tracks for me to find." She gestured toward the departing sheriff. "Reed's a good man. He'll give you a fair chance if you earn it." She paused. "But the rest will be up to you." Santiago straightened, something like determination settling onto his features. "I won't waste it." "See that you don't," Eleanor replied. But there was a gentleness in her voice that hadn't been there before. After they departed, Eleanor stood alone in her yard, the rain beginning to fall more steadily now. She returned the Winchester to its place above the fireplace, her fingers lingering briefly on the polished wood. "Well, Father," she murmured to the empty house, "I don't think that went quite as you would have handled it. Too much showing off." She could almost hear his laugh, the way he'd respond, "Results speak for themselves, Little Hawk." As she tended to her animals, securing them against the approaching storm, Eleanor considered what would come next. Her carefully maintained facade of the helpless farm girl had been shattered, at least for those who had witnessed today's events. Word would spread. Questions would be asked. The rain intensified as she finished her chores, thunder rolling across the valley. Eleanor stood in the barn doorway, watching the storm transform her land. Water was precious in Arizona territory. It brought life, renewal, change. Like the storm, change was coming to Eleanor Hawkins' life, ready or not. Later, as she packed a small valise for her trip to town, Eleanor noticed a piece of paper that had fallen from Santiago's vest during the confrontation. Unfolding it, she found not another gang plan, but a carefully preserved wanted poster. Not for Blackwood or any of the Raven's Claw gang, but for someone called the Ghost Rider, a mysterious figure who'd been robbing stagecoaches along the California border. The description was vague, but one detail caught her eye. The Ghost. Ryder was said to be an extraordinary marksman who never left witnesses, but never killed either. Shots through hat brims, guns knocked from hands, the calling cards of someone who'd been trained to value precision over power. Eleanor studied the poster, a chill running down her spine despite the warmth of her cabin. The Ghost Rider's last reported robbery had been less than 50 miles from Silver Springs, just before the Raven's Claw hit the bank there. She carefully folded the poster and tucked it into her father's journal. There was more happening here than a simple gang on the run. The connection between the Ghost Rider and the Raven's Claw wasn't immediately clear, but her father had taught her that in tracking, the trails that seemed unrelated often led to the same waterhole. Tomorrow would bring questions from the townsfolk, curiosity about her shooting skills, perhaps even some unwanted attention, but it might also bring answers. The Raven's Claw gang was finished, but Eleanor sensed that their capture was just the beginning of a much larger story. As the storm raged outside, Eleanor Hawkins cleaned her father's Winchester one last time before placing it in its specialized carrying case, not above the fireplace where it had been displayed, but beside the door where it would be ready at a moment's notice. The quiet farm girl had served her purpose. Now it was time for the Sharpshooter to embrace her true identity. The heavy raindrops pounding on her roof couldn't mask the sound of approaching hoofbeats, a single rider moving fast despite the storm. Eleanor reached for the Winchester. Her movements calm and practiced. Sheriff Reed wouldn't have sent a wagon so soon, and he certainly wouldn't have sent a lone rider in this weather. Someone else was coming to the Hawkins farm, and they were in a hurry to get there before the prisoners reached town. "It seems we're not finished just yet, Father," Eleanor whispered, checking the rifle's load as she positioned herself beside the window. The storm was about to get much more interesting. The approaching rider materialized through the rain-soaked twilight, a hunched figure on a lathered horse pushing hard against the storm. Eleanor observed from her window, Winchester ready but not yet raised. Years of training had taught her patience, to observe before acting, to understand before engaging. The rider pulled up sharply at her gate, throwing back a dripping oilskin coat to reveal a woman's form. Even through the downpour, Eleanor recognized the distinctive posture of Abigail Collins, the telegraph operator's daughter from Prosperity. "Miss Hawkins," Abigail called out, voice nearly lost in the storm. "Miss Hawkins, please." Eleanor set aside her rifle and hurried onto the porch. "Abigail, get yourself in here before you drown." Moments later, the soaked young woman stood shivering by Eleanor's fireplace, clutching a steaming cup of coffee. Her usually neat blonde hair hung in wet ropes around her pale face. "They never made it to town," Abigail blurted, her eyes wide with fear. "Sheriff Reed, the deputies, the prisoners, none of them arrived." A cold weight settled in Eleanor's stomach. "What happened? Nobody knows for certain," Abigail said, hands trembling around her cup. "Father received a telegram from Fort Benson about the Raven's Claw capture. He sent Timothy to find the sheriff, to tell him the U.S. Marshal was on his way from Tucson." She swallowed hard. Timothy found 2 deputies dead on the East Trail, no sign of the sheriff or the prisoners. Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. The storm had washed away any chance of tracking, but the implications were clear. Someone had ambushed Reed's party and freed the Raven's Claw. "What about Santiago?" Eleanor asked. Abigail shook her head. "No sign of him either." "And the town? Prosperity?" "In panic," Abigail admitted. "When Timothy brought the news, Father sent me to warn you while he organized the men. They're forming a posse, but—" Her voice faltered. "Miss Hawkins, there's more. Before I left, 3 strangers rode into town. They were asking questions about you." Eleanor moved to her trunk, pulling out trousers, a flannel shirt, and a worn leather vest. "How many men does your father have?" 8, maybe 10, Abigail answered, watching in confusion as Eleanor began changing behind a screen. "What are you doing?" "The quiet farm girl isn't going to be much help tonight," Eleanor replied, emerging in her new attire, hair tied back tightly. She looked nothing like the demure young woman Prosperity knew. "Tell me about these strangers." 2 men, 1 woman, Abigail said, eyeing Eleanor's transformation. "Expensive clothes, Eastern accents. They claimed to be from the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Said they were tracking the Raven's Claw." Eleanor buckled on her father's old gun belt, checking the Colt revolver before securing it. "Pinkertons don't typically work in groups of 3, and they certainly don't wear expensive clothes in the field." She moved methodically around the room, gathering ammunition, a hunting knife, and various small items that disappeared into her pockets. The movements were practiced, efficient, clearly not the first time she had prepared for danger. "Who are you?" Abigail whispered, eyes wide. "Really?" Eleanor paused, studying the young woman. Abigail Collins had always been kind to her in town, never joining in the whispers about the poor Hawkins girl who would surely fail without a husband. She deserved some truth. "I'm exactly who I've always been," Eleanor said finally. "Just not all of who I am." She handed Abigail a sealed envelope from her father's desk. "If I don't return in 3 days, take this to Judge Hollister in Tucson. No one else. Understand?" Abigail nodded, clutching the envelope. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor checked her Winchester one last time before slinging it across her back. "I'm going to find Sheriff Reed and Santiago. And I'm going to discover who these so-called Pinkertons really are. You can't go alone. It's madness." "I won't be alone," Eleanor replied, her voice hardening as she pulled on her father's old cavalry hat. "I'll have the element of surprise. Everyone's still looking for a helpless farm girl. That's not who they're going to find." The storm had begun to ease as Eleanor rode out, the clouds breaking to reveal a silver sliver of moon. Abigail had reluctantly agreed to remain at the farm, promising to depart at first light to deliver Eleanor's message to the town's posse. Stay clear of the East Trail. Eleanor had her own tracking to do, and she didn't need well-meaning townsmen. Muddying the waters, the desert air smelled of rain-soaked sage and potential, the potential for new growth and the potential for bloodshed. Eleanor followed a game trail that paralleled the main road, invisible to casual observers, but well known to her from years of hunting. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Always approach from an unexpected direction, little hawk. Become the hunter they never see coming." 2 hours of careful riding brought her within sight of a faint glow nestled against the base of Table Mesa. A campfire, carefully screened but visible to trained eyes. Eleanor dismounted, securing her horse in a sheltered arroyo, before continuing. On foot, moving like a shadow through the rain-dampened brush, she approached the camp, her senses alert to every sound and movement. The voices reached her first, low, cultured tones that confirmed Abigail's description of Eastern accents. "Should have arrived by now," a woman was saying, frustration evident in her crisp consonants. "Patience, Victoria. replied a male voice. "Our friend assured us Miss Hawkins would come. The message delivered to town was quite clear." "I don't like relying on local talent," a second man interjected. "Particularly not the kind that would ambush lawmen." Eleanor edged closer, keeping to the deeper shadows. Through a gap in the brush, she could make out 3 figures around the small fire. The woman, Victoria, wore a riding habit of expensive cut, though it was adapted for practical use. The 2 men were similarly well dressed, their manner suggesting education and wealth. Not Pinkertons, certainly, but not ordinary bandits either. A 4th figure sat apart from them, his back to Eleanor. His shoulders were hunched, his posture defeated. Even in the poor light, she recognized Santiago. One of the men, tall, aristocratic, with a well-trimmed beard, removed a pocket watch and consulted it. "Midnight. If she doesn't arrive soon, we may need to consider a more direct approach." The Colonel was quite explicit, Victoria countered. "Eleanor Hawkins is to be approached carefully. After today's events, she'll be on her guard. Harrington's men were supposed to create a diversion, not massacre the sheriff's party." Eleanor's blood ran cold. These people knew her, were expecting her, had orchestrated the attack on Sheriff Reed. Yet they spoke of her father, the Colonel, with familiarity and apparent respect. What game were they playing? The bearded man sighed. "The deadline remains unchanged. We need the Hawkins girl and the key by tomorrow night, or the operation fails." "The key?" the second man questioned. "I thought we were here for the cipher." "The key unlocks the cipher," Victoria explained impatiently. "The Colonel's final message can't be decoded without it. According to our intelligence, he gave it to his daughter before his death." Eleanor's mind raced. The key they mentioned could only be one thing, her father's pocket watch, which he had indeed pressed into her hands on his deathbed, making her promise never to part with it. But what cipher? What message? Santiago shifted, finally raising his head. In the firelight, Eleanor could see blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "She won't come," he said, voice ragged. "Not after what your men did to the sheriff." "Oh, she'll come," Victoria replied coldly. "If her father taught her half of what our reports suggest, Eleanor Hawkins won't abandon her responsibilities or her friends." Santiago spat on the ground. "You don't know her." "On the contrary," the bearded man said, "we've been watching her for 6 months. Ever since Colonel Hawkins died, with our nation's secrets locked in his stubborn mind. She's not part of your world," Santiago insisted. "She's just a farm girl who happens to be good with a rifle." Victoria laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Is that what she told you? That girl, as you call her, has been her father's secret apprentice for 15 years. The Colonel trained her in everything he knew: marksmanship, ciphers, intelligence gathering. She's been playing a role so long she might actually believe it herself." Eleanor's grip tightened on her Winchester. These strangers knew things about her life that she had never shared with anyone, not even Santiago during their brief alliance. Yet they spoke half-truths mixed with outright falsehoods. Yes, her father had trained her in shooting and tracking, but ciphers, intelligence gathering? Her father had been a scout, not a spy, hadn't he? Memories flickered through her mind. Her father's frequent absences when she was young, the locked trunk he kept in his study, the mysterious visitors who sometimes arrived late at night and departed before dawn. She had always accepted his explanations about army business, but now doubt crept in like a desert serpent, silent and deadly. "Where's Sheriff Reed?" Santiago demanded, changing the subject. The bearded man waved dismissively. "Alive for now. He'll remain that way as long as Miss Hawkins cooperates." "And Blackwood? The rest of the gang?" "Collateral damage," Victoria said coldly. "Harrington was overzealous." "Harrington?" Eleanor whispered to herself, the name triggering recognition. The Ghost Rider, the mysterious figure from the wanted poster she'd found. Not a bandit at all, but someone working for these people. She had heard enough. These strangers, might know things about her father, might have answers to questions she hadn't known to ask, but their methods revealed their true character. Anyone who would ambush a sheriff's posse and hold an innocent man hostage deserved no consideration. Eleanor retreated silently, circling the camp until she had a clear view of all four figures. The bearded man stood with his back to her now, gesturing as he spoke. Perfect. She leveled the Winchester and fired a single shot, the bullet passing so close to the man's ear that he instinctively ducked, losing his balance and falling forward. "That was your only warning," Eleanor called out, her voice carrying clear and cold across the campsite. "The next one won't miss." Chaos erupted. Victoria dropped to a crouch, reaching for a hidden weapon. The second man flipped over a small table, creating cover. Only Santiago remained still, a slow smile spreading across his battered face. "Hands where I can see them," Eleanor commanded, stepping into the light while keeping a safe distance. "Now!" The bearded man recovered his composure, first raising his hands slowly. "Miss Hawkins, I presume. Your reputation is well deserved." "Who are you?" Eleanor demanded, the Winchester rock steady in her hands. "Clayton Reed, United States Secret Service," he replied, keeping his hands visible. "My companions are agents. Victoria Harding and Thomas Mercer. We've been trying to contact you for some time, but circumstances have been challenging." "Secret Service agents don't kidnap deputies or ambush lawmen," Eleanor countered. "We didn't," Agent Mercer protested from behind his makeshift cover. "That was Harrington's doing, a local contractor who exceeded his instructions." "And yet you haven't disavowed his actions," Eleanor noted coldly. "Where's Sheriff Reed?" Victoria Harding slowly lowered her hands. 5 miles north, at the abandoned Cortez mine. He's unharmed, merely detained. Harrington's men are guarding him, the same men who killed 2 deputies. Reed at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. An unfortunate escalation. Harrington will answer for that. "Not good enough," Eleanor said, taking a step closer, the Winchester never wavering. "You claim to be government agents, yet you operate like criminals. You speak of my father with familiarity, yet he never mentioned any of you. Why should I believe anything you say?" Reed reached slowly into his coat, freezing when Eleanor's rifle shifted toward his heart. "May I?" "It's identification only." At her nod, he withdrew a leather wallet, opening it to reveal an official-looking badge and papers. "I can prove our legitimacy, Miss Hawkins. But more importantly, I can tell you the truth about your father, about who he really was, and why his last message is critical to national security." Eleanor kept her expression neutral, though her mind was churning. "Release Santiago first." Reed nodded to Victoria, who moved to untie the young deputy. Santiago rubbed his wrists, eyeing the agents with undisguised contempt before limping to Eleanor's side. "They're lying about something," he whispered. "They know too much about you, but they keep arguing among themselves about details." Eleanor made a small gesture of acknowledgement, her focus still on Reed. "Start talking. What was my father to you?" Reed straightened his coat, assuming a more formal posture. "Colonel Jonathan Hawkins was not just a scout for the 3rd Cavalry. Miss Hawkins, that was his cover. In reality, he was one of our most valuable intelligence operatives, operating across the Southwest and into Mexico. For 15 years, he gathered information about foreign agents, gun runners, and revolutionaries working against American interests. Despite herself, Eleanor felt a chill of recognition. It explained so much. Her father's unexplained trips, his insistence on training her to shoot, track, and observe well beyond what any farmer's daughter would need. 6 months ago, Reed continued, your father uncovered something significant, a plot involving European interests seeking to destabilize the Mexican government and potentially trigger a new conflict along our southern border. Before he could deliver his full report, he was poisoned. Poisoned. Eleanor's composure nearly broke. My father died of heart failure. A common misdiagnosis with certain toxins, Victoria interjected. We believe Mexican agents identified him and administered a slow-acting poison during his last mission. He managed to return home but knew he was dying. What does this have to do with me? Eleanor demanded, though she already suspected the answer. Reed's expression softened slightly. Before he died, your father encoded his final intelligence in a cipher that only he knew how to break. Our sources indicate he left the key with you, likely something personal, something you would keep close. Eleanor's free hand moved unconsciously toward her pocket, where her father's watch resided. The agent's eyes tracked the movement, confirming her suspicions. Even if that were true, she said carefully, why the elaborate charade? Why not simply approach me directly? We tried, Victoria said with evident frustration. 3 times we sent agents to make contact. Each time they reported that you refused to acknowledge any connection to intelligence work. We began to suspect you were protecting the information, perhaps planning to sell it yourself. Santiago snorted in disbelief. You people are crazy. Miss Hawkins is the most honest person in the territory, and the most skilled at maintaining a cover, Reed countered, just like her father. Eleanor's mind worked furiously. If these people were legitimate, they represented her best chance at understanding her father's final days. If they weren't, they were dangerous adversaries with unknown motives. Either way, she needed more information before committing to any course of action. I'll make you a deal, she said finally. Take me to Sheriff Reed. If he's unharmed as you claim, I'll listen to your full explanation. Then I'll decide whether to help you. Reed exchanged glances with his companions. Acceptable, with one condition. You allow us to examine the key you carry, not to take it, merely to confirm it's what we seek. Eleanor hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew her father's pocket watch. The silver case was worn smooth from years of handling, the initials J.H. barely visible on its face. This is all he gave me, she said, holding it up but not handing it over. He made me promise never to part with it. Victoria leaned forward, squinting in the firelight. Yes, that's it. The case contains a cipher. Key. A series of numbers that, when applied to his final message, will reveal its contents. Eleanor returned the watch to her pocket. Then we have a deal. But be warned, if Sheriff Reed has been harmed or if you're lying about your identities, I'll make the Raven's Claw capture look like a church social by comparison. Reed smiled thinly. I would expect nothing less from Jonathan Hawkins' daughter. As they prepared to depart for the Cortez mine, Eleanor pulled Santiago aside. Can you ride? He nodded grimly. I've handled worse. Good. I need you to get back to town. Find Judge Hollister's son. He's staying at the Arizona Hotel. Tell him Scarlet Eagle seeks verification. He'll understand. Santiago's brow furrowed. What does that mean? Eleanor checked to ensure the agents weren't within earshot. It means I'm not as naive as they think. My father may have had secrets, but he also had contingency plans. If these people are who they claim to be, Thomas Hollister will confirm it. If not, Eleanor's expression hardened. Then they'll learn exactly how well my father taught me to deal with enemies of the United States. Santiago studied her with new eyes. You know, I'm starting to think there's no end to the surprises with you, Miss Hawkins. Eleanor, she corrected him. If we're going to be allies in whatever this is, you might as well use my name. As Santiago slipped away under cover of darkness, Eleanor mounted her horse and turned to face the waiting agents. The daughter of a simple cavalry scout might have been overwhelmed by their claims and demands, but if her father had truly been something more, then perhaps so was she. Lead the way, Mr. Reed, she said calmly. Let's see if your actions match your words. The 3 agents exchanged glances, clearly recalculating their assessment of Eleanor Hawkins. Whatever they had expected, frightened compliance perhaps, or stubborn denial, They hadn't anticipated this steel-spined woman who negotiated terms as coolly as any diplomat. As they rode into the night, Eleanor fingered the watch in her pocket. Whatever secrets it contained, whatever truth lay behind her father's life and death, one thing was certain: the quiet farm girl was gone forever, replaced by something far more dangerous. A woman determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Behind them, the embers of the abandoned campfire winked out one by one, leaving only darkness where light had briefly revealed new mysteries and old deceptions. Dawn painted the desert in watercolor hues as Eleanor and the three agents approached the abandoned Cortez mine. The old silver operation had been shuttered for nearly a decade, its wooden structures bleached and warping in the harsh Arizona climate. From their position on a low ridge, Eleanor could see three men moving around the mine entrance, rifles slung across their backs. "Harrington's men," Reed confirmed, lowering his field glasses. "The sheriff should be inside the main tunnel." Eleanor studied the layout, considering angles and approaches. "I count 3 guards. Where's Harrington himself?" Reed's expression darkened. "Unknown. After the ambush, he was supposed to secure the prisoners at this location, then meet us at the camp. So he's either inside with Reed or he's deserted." "You," Eleanor concluded, "neither option speaks well of your planning." Victoria Harding bristled. "We hardly anticipated the local lawman would travel with the complete Raven's Claw gang. Harrington was told to create a diversion that would allow us to meet with you privately. And instead, he massacred deputies and kidnapped a sheriff." Eleanor replied coldly, "Excellent judgment in your choice of contractors." The third agent, Mercer, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand. Miss Hawkins, do you see a way to approach without alerting the guards?" Eleanor returned her attention to the mine. Beyond the practical considerations of how to rescue Sheriff Reed, she was evaluating these supposed Secret Service agents. Their knowledge of her father seemed genuine, but their operational methods were sloppy at best, suspicious at worst. "There's an old ventilation shaft on the western slope," she said finally. "It connects to the main tunnel about 50 yards in. The opening will be narrow, but passable." Reed raised an eyebrow. "You seem familiar with this location." "My father brought me here 3 years ago," Eleanor replied. "He said every good scout should know the terrain within 50 miles of home." "Scouting," Victoria muttered. "Always. His cover story." Eleanor ignored the comment, focusing instead on formulating a plan. "I'll approach through the shaft. You 3 create a distraction at the main entrance, enough to draw the guards' attention, but not enough to make them harm the sheriff." "And what about Harrington if he's inside?" Mercer asked. Eleanor checked her Winchester. "Let me worry about him." Reed seemed poised to object, but something in Eleanor's expression made him reconsider. Instead, he nodded briskly. "Very well. We'll create your distraction in exactly 20 minutes. That should give you time to reach position." 15, Eleanor counted, already shifting backward from their vantage point. "I move quickly." As she slipped away, the agents exchanged glances loaded with unspoken concerns. For the first time, since this strange encounter began, they appeared genuinely uncertain of their control over the situation. Eleanor circled wide around the mine site, keeping to natural depressions in the terrain where the morning shadows still lingered. The ventilation shaft was exactly where she remembered, a narrow opening reinforced with rotting timber, barely visible behind a growth of desert scrub. Before descending, she took a moment to check her weapons. The Winchester was her primary tool, but her father's Colt revolver provided a reliable backup. More important than either was the knife strapped to her calf, silent and deadly in close quarters. The shaft was narrow and steep, requiring her to lower herself carefully using old iron rungs embedded in the rock. Dust and cobwebs suggested it hadn't been used in years. Good for surprise, bad for breathing. She pulled a bandana over her nose and mouth and continued her descent. At the bottom, Eleanor paused, allowing her eyes to adjust to the gloom. The connecting passage to the main tunnel was low, forcing her to crouch as she moved forward. The scent of damp earth and old timbers filled her nostrils, along with something else, tobacco smoke. Someone was waiting in the main tunnel. She eased forward silently until she reached the junction, then pressed herself against the rough wall, listening. Two voices drifted from the direction of the mine entrance. Should have been back by now, one man was saying, his tone nervous. What if something went wrong? Harrington knows what he's doing, replied a second voice. We just sit tight until he returns. And the sheriff, a short laugh. He ain't going nowhere, trussed up tighter than a Christmas turkey. Eleanor calculated distances and positions. The speakers sounded about 20 yards toward the entrance, while deeper in the tunnel she could make out a faint shape, a figure seated on the ground, head bowed. Sheriff Reed, most likely. A distant shout from outside interrupted her assessment. The distraction had begun. What the hell? The first voice again, alarmed now. Jackson, check it out, ordered the second man. I'll watch the prisoner. Footsteps retreated toward the entrance, but one set remained, pacing slowly. Eleanor waited, timing the guard's movements. 3 steps one way, pause, 3 steps back. A predictable pattern, the mark of an amateur. She counted down in her head, anticipating the moment when the outside distraction would escalate. Right on cue, a gunshot echoed from outside, followed by shouting. The guard's footsteps quickened, moving toward the entrance but stopping short of leaving his post. Jackson, what's happening out there? The moment of divided attention was all Eleanor needed. She slipped from the ventilation passage into the main tunnel, Winchester ready. The guard stood with his back to her, peering anxiously toward the entrance, his rifle held loosely in one hand. Eleanor covered the distance between them in 3 silent strides, bringing the butt of her Winchester down hard on the back of his head. He crumpled without a sound. She quickly bound and gagged him with strips torn from his own bandana, then moved toward the seated figure. Sheriff Reed looked up as she approached, his eyes widening in recognition despite the bruising that distorted his features. Didn't expect to see you here, Miss Hawkins, he murmured, as she sliced through the ropes binding his wrists and ankles. Can you walk? She asked, ignoring his surprise. Reed flexed his hands, wincing. Give me a minute to get some feeling back. Those bastards worked me over pretty good. Who exactly? Eleanor pressed, keeping her voice low. The men who ambushed your party, were they Raven's Claw or someone else? Neither, Reed said grimly. Professional gunmen from their methods, 6 of them, led by a cold-eyed fellow called Harrington, killed 2 of my deputies before we knew what was happening. His expression darkened with grief and rage. Lambert and Young, good men, both of them. And the Raven's Claw prisoners? Taken elsewhere. Harrington seemed most interested in Blackwood, kept asking him questions about some Ghost Rider character. Eleanor nodded, pieces falling into place. And Santiago? Separated from the others. Harrington seemed to think the boy knew something. Important. Reed studied her with new awareness. Miss Hawkins, what's going on here? These weren't ordinary bandits. They mentioned your name, asked about your father's effects. It's complicated, Eleanor replied, helping him to his feet. There are 3 people outside claiming to be Secret Service agents. They say they knew my father, that he was working for them. Reed leaned heavily against the tunnel wall. Your father, the Major, was Army through and through. So I always believed, Eleanor said. But these people know things, details that suggest my father may have had another role. Before Reed could respond, a commotion erupted at the mine entrance. Shouts, then a rapid exchange of gunfire. Eleanor pushed the sheriff toward the ventilation passage. That's our exit. Can you manage the climb? Reed nodded grimly. Just point me in the right direction. They had barely reached the passage when footsteps pounded down the tunnel toward them. Eleanor turned, rifle raised, just as a figure burst into view. Miss Hawkins! It was Agent Mercer, breathing hard, blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. "We have a situation." His warning came too late. Behind him, 3 more men appeared. Rough-looking characters with drawn weapons. One of them, a tall figure, with cold blue eyes and an immaculate black coat despite the dusty surroundings, smiled thinly. "Miss Eleanor Hawkins, I presume," he said, his accent refined yet hard-edged. "I've been looking forward to making your acquaintance." "Harrington," Eleanor guessed, noting how Mercer tensed at the name. "At your service," the man replied with a mocking half-bow, "though I must apologize for the circumstances of our meeting. I had hoped for a more civilized conversation." Eleanor kept her Winchester trained on him, acutely aware of his men spreading out to flank her, where are Reed and Victoria. "Currently enjoying my men's hospitality outside," Harrington replied smoothly. "I'm afraid they were rather upset when I explained that our arrangement had evolved." "You're not working for them," Eleanor stated. Harrington's smile widened. "Let's say our interests temporarily aligned. The Secret Service wants your father's cipher. My employers are equally interested, but for different reasons. And who might those employers be?" Sheriff Reed demanded, his voice steady despite his weakened condition. Harrington ignored him, his focus entirely on Eleanor. "Your father was a remarkable man, Miss Hawkins. He operated under deep cover for years, gathering intelligence that would have changed the balance of power in the Southwest. Until, that is, he decided his loyalty to country outweighed his loyalty to his true employers." A cold certainty settled in Eleanor's stomach. "You poisoned him." "A regrettable necessity," Harrington acknowledged without a trace of remorse. Colonel Hawkins had become a liability. Unfortunately, he managed to encode his final intelligence report before the poison took full effect. That's where you come in. Eleanor's mind raced. If these people had killed her father, why would Reed and the Secret Service agents work with them, even temporarily? Unless... "Reed doesn't know you killed my father," she realized aloud. "A detail I omitted from our arrangement," Harrington confirmed. "The Secret Service believes your father died of natural causes after hiding vital intelligence. They want his cipher to protect American interests. My employers wanted to ensure certain European investments in Mexico remain secure." He extended his hand. "The watch, Miss Hawkins. Give it to me now, and I give you my word that you and the sheriff will walk out of here alive." Eleanor's finger tensed on the trigger of her Winchester. She could likely take Harrington before his men reacted, but Reed and Mercer would almost certainly die in the ensuing gunfight. She needed time, space to maneuver. "I don't have it with me," she lied smoothly. "It's hidden back at my farm." Harrington's expression hardened. "Do you take me for a fool? You've carried that watch since your father's death." "Check for yourself," Eleanor challenged, carefully keeping her hands visible on her rifle. "It's not on me." Harrington studied her for a long moment, then nodded to one of his men. "Search her carefully." As the man approached, Eleanor permitted herself a small smile. The watch was indeed hidden, not on her person, but slipped into Santiago's pocket during their brief conversation at the agent's camp the previous night, a precaution that now seemed prescient. The search, though thorough, yielded nothing. Harrington's expression darkened with genuine surprise and anger. "Where is it?" he demanded. "Safe," Eleanor replied simply. "And it will remain that way until I understand exactly what's happening here, starting with proof of who you really work for." Harrington laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "You are your father's daughter indeed. Very well, Miss Hawkins. A demonstration of good faith." He gestured to his men. "Release Agent Mercer. Escort him and the sheriff outside." As his men moved to comply, Harrington turned back to Eleanor. "You and I will have a private conversation. I believe we can reach an arrangement beneficial to all parties." "Except my father," Eleanor noted coldly. Something flickered in Harrington's eyes, not remorse but a calculating reassessment. Your father made his choice, Miss Hawkins. The question now is what choice you will make. As Reed and Mercer were led away, Eleanor weighed her options. Harrington was dangerous, but he was also her best source of information about her father's true activities. If she wanted answers, she would need to play along, for now. Very well, she said finally. Let's talk. Harrington gestured toward a rough wooden table deeper in the tunnel, where a lantern cast wavering shadows across the rock walls. After you. As they seated themselves across from each other, Eleanor felt a strange sense of familiarity, as though she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Perhaps she had been. Perhaps all those years of training with her father had been leading to exactly this, a deadly game of cat and mouse with the forces that had ultimately killed him. Harrington placed his revolver on the table within easy reach. Now, Miss Hawkins, let me tell you about the real Jonathan Hawkins, the man behind the myth. Outside the mine, the Arizona sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of the previous night's storm. Within the cool darkness of the tunnel, Eleanor Hawkins prepared to hear truths about her father that would forever change her understanding of the man who had raised her. And somewhere between Prosperity and Tucson, Santiago rode hard, carrying a silver pocket watch whose secrets could alter the fate of nations. Your father began his career exactly as you believe, Harrington began, pouring amber liquid from a silver flask into 2 tin cups. A scout for the 3rd Cavalry, distinguished service in the Apache campaigns. His skill at gathering intelligence caught the attention of certain parties in Washington. He pushed 1 cup toward Eleanor, who left it untouched. Harrington smiled faintly and continued. By 1875, Colonel Hawkins was operating as a special agent for the War Department, gathering information about foreign interests in the Southwest. But his true value emerged when he was approached by a consortium of European investors with interests in Mexican silver mines. He was recruited as a spy, Eleanor stated flatly. As a consultant, Harrington corrected. Paid handsomely to provide information about army movements and government plans that might affect foreign investments. A common arrangement, I assure you. Until it wasn't, Eleanor prompted. Harrington sipped his drink. 3 years ago, your father discovered something that troubled his conscience. Evidence that his European employers were funding revolutionary activities in Mexico, destabilizing the region to drive down property values before acquiring key mining rights. He studied her reaction before continuing. Instead of bringing this information to his employers as expected, Jonathan began gathering evidence secretly. For 3 years, he compiled names, dates, transaction records, building a case that could implicate dozens of powerful people on both sides of the Atlantic. And 6 months ago, these employers discovered his betrayal. Eleanor finished. Precisely. Harrington's expression remained neutral, professional. A difficult decision was made. Unfortunately, the colonel proved more resilient than anticipated. He survived long enough to encode his evidence and hide the key to the cipher. Eleanor considered this information carefully. It aligned with small discrepancies she'd noticed in her father's behavior during his final years. Unexplained absences, mysterious correspondence, late-night visitors. Yet one question remained unanswered. "Why tell me all this?" she asked. "Why not simply force me to surrender the watch?" Harrington's smile returned, colder than before. "Because, Miss Hawkins, I believe we can reach an accommodation. My employers are not monsters, merely businessmen protecting their investments. They're prepared to offer you $50,000 for the watch and your silence." The sum was staggering, enough to secure Eleanor's future for decades. She kept her expression neutral, betraying nothing of her thoughts. "And if I refuse? Then matters become unpleasant," Harrington replied matter-of-factly, "beginning with Sheriff Reed and continuing to anyone else in Prosperity who might be dear to you. The Raven's Claw gang is still at my disposal, remember. Black Eye Blackwood owes me a considerable debt for his freedom. Eleanor took a slow, measured breath. I'll need assurances beyond your word. Of course. Harrington reached into his coat, withdrawing a bank draft. 10,000 now, the remainder upon delivery of the watch. As he set the paper on the table, a commotion erupted from the mine entrance. Shouts, then gunfire. Harrington rose swiftly, drawing his revolver. "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the sound. The moment he turned his back, Eleanor slipped her father's knife from its sheath. As Harrington reached the curve in the tunnel, she launched it with a practiced flick of her wrist. The blade buried itself in the wooden support beam inches from his head. Harrington froze, then turned slowly, his expression a mixture of surprise and newfound respect. "That was a warning," Eleanor said calmly, her Winchester now leveled at his chest. "The next one won't miss." Before Harrington could respond, new voices echoed from the entrance, unfamiliar, authoritative tones calling for surrender. The sound of multiple boots on stone grew louder. "U.S. Marshals," Eleanor guessed, a slight smile forming. "It seems Santiago delivered my message." Harrington's face hardened. "This isn't over, Miss Hawkins." "Oh, I believe it is," she replied. "Drop your weapon." For a moment it seemed Harrington might risk a shot, then practicality won out. He carefully placed his revolver on the ground. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "The people I work for don't forgive failure." "Neither do I," Eleanor responded, her voice carrying the same steel that had faced down the Raven's Claw gang. "My father's mistake was letting you live once he discovered your true nature. I won't repeat it." Harrington's eyes widened slightly, perhaps truly seeing Eleanor Hawkins for the first time, not as a means to an end, but as a formidable adversary in her own right. "Miss Hawkins," a new voice called from down the tunnel. "U.S. Marshal James Parker, are you in there?" "Here, Marshal," she called back, never taking her eyes off Harrington. "I have a prisoner for you." As booted feet approached, Harrington offered one final, cryptic observation. "You've chosen your side now, Miss Hawkins. I hope you're prepared for what comes next." "I was born prepared," Eleanor replied, thinking of all the years of training, all the lessons her father had instilled. "That was my father's final gift to me." The marshals rounded the corner, rifles ready. Among them stood Santiago, sporting a fresh deputy's badge and a triumphant grin. Sheriff Reed followed close behind, his injuries tended but his expression grim. As Harrington was taken into custody, Reed approached Eleanor. "You've got a lot of explaining to do, Miss Hawkins." "So it would seem," she agreed, finally lowering her Winchester. "But first, I believe we have some Secret Service agents to sort out." Outside, the desert stretched vast and unforgiving under the midday sun. Eleanor emerged from the mine's darkness into a scene of organized chaos, marshals securing prisoners, Reed conferring with Parker, and Agent Reed arguing vehemently with a distinguished older man whose bearing screamed authority. Santiago made his way to Eleanor's side. "Judge Hollister's son," he explained, nodding toward the older man. "Arrived with the marshals from Tucson. Seems your message got his attention." "And the watch?" Eleanor asked quietly. Santiago patted his vest pocket. "Safe and sound, though I still don't understand what makes it so valuable." "Neither do I," Eleanor admitted, "but I intend to find out." As Thomas Hollister approached, dismissing Reed with a curt gesture, Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Whatever came next, whatever, truths awaited in her father's cipher. She would face them with the same courage and clarity that had brought her through this day. The quiet farm girl was gone forever. In her place stood something her father had spent a lifetime creating, a woman prepared to continue his fight, armed with both his rifle and his legacy. "Miss Hawkins," Hollister greeted her formally. "I Believe we have much to discuss about your father's final mission. Eleanor nodded, thinking of the silver watch, the encoded secrets, and the road ahead. Yes, she agreed simply. I believe we do. 3 days after the confrontation at the Cortez mine, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers, the silver pocket watch open beside them. Judge Hollister's son, Thomas, who had revealed himself as a senior official in Army intelligence, had provided the cipher key needed to decode her father's final messages. The result was spread before her. Detailed records of European financing for Mexican revolutionaries, arms shipments disguised as mining equipment, and a network of corrupt officials on both sides of the border. Your father died protecting this information, Thomas Hollister said, studying her from across the table. His distinguished silver hair and tailored suit seemed out of place in the rustic farmhouse, yet he carried himself with the ease of a man accustomed to adapting to his surroundings. And now you expect me to simply hand it over, Eleanor replied, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. Hollister smiled faintly. Actually, I expected to pry it from your reluctant grasp. Your cooperation has been surprising. Not cooperation. Partnership. Eleanor tapped the decoded papers. These stay with me. You get copies. The government doesn't typically partner with civilians, Miss Hawkins. The government doesn't typically employ women as intelligence operatives either, she countered. Yet here we are. Hollister's eyebrows rose. You can't seriously be suggesting— My father trained me my entire life, Eleanor interrupted. Not just in marksmanship, but in observation, analysis, wilderness survival. I speak Spanish and Apache. I can read sign that most scouts would miss. She met his gaze directly. He was preparing me for something. This must be it. Before Hollister could respond, a knock at the door announced Sheriff Reed's arrival. The lawman looked better than he had at the mine, though fading bruises still marked his face. At his side stood Santiago, wearing a deputy's badge that no longer appeared provisional. Miss Hawkins, Reed greeted her, tipping his hat. Mr. Hollister. Any news of Harrington? Eleanor asked, gesturing for them to sit. Reed's expression darkened. Vanished. The marshals transferred him to Tucson, but he never arrived. 2 guards dead, no witnesses. His European employers are thorough, Hollister noted grimly. They'll want to tie up loose ends, including me, Eleanor stated. Hollister didn't deny it. You possess information that could disrupt operations worth millions. They won't simply let that stand. And Blackwood, she asked Reed. The Ravens' claw? Still at large, Santiago answered, his young face serious. We've had reports of them regrouping near the Mexican border. Eleanor absorbed this information, mind already calculating possibilities and contingencies. The quiet life she had known was finished. Had been, perhaps, since the moment the Raven's claw rode onto her property. Now she faced a choice about what would replace it. I'm selling the farm, she announced. The men exchanged surprised glances. Eleanor, Reed began, using her given name for the first time, don't make hasty decisions. Once this business settles, it won't settle, she interrupted. Not for me. Harrington knows my connection to these documents. Even if we neutralize his current employers, there will be others who want this information. She looked around the farmhouse, taking in the familiar surroundings that had once represented her entire world. My father didn't train me to hide. Hollister studied her thoughtfully. What exactly are you proposing? I want to continue my father's work, Eleanor said simply. Not from behind a plough, but in the field where I can make a difference. The government doesn't employ women as agents. Yes, you mentioned that. Eleanor smiled thinly. Yet unofficial operatives exist. My father was one. I can be another. Hollister fell silent, calculation evident in his eyes. Finally he spoke. There would be conditions, strict ones. I expected nothing less. No official recognition, no badge or authority. You would operate entirely on your own, with only periodic contact through designated channels. Eleanor nodded. And you would need to establish a new identity. Eleanor Hawkins, the farmer's daughter, must disappear completely. She felt a momentary pang at this, but pushed it aside. Already planned. The farm sale will provide sufficient funds to establish myself elsewhere. One last condition, Hollister said, leaning forward. You would report only to me. No one else in the department would know of your existence or activities. Eleanor considered this carefully. Why? Because, Miss Hawkins, there are elements within our own government sympathetic to these European interests. Your father discovered that shortly before his death. Hollister's expression was grave. It's why he encoded his final report rather than delivering it through official channels. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Eleanor had expected external enemies, not internal ones. If I agree to these terms, she said finally, what happens next? Hollister withdrew a slim folder from his briefcase. We've identified a priority target based on your father's intelligence. Blackwood wasn't working with Harrington by chance. He's been smuggling weapons across the border for months, using the Raven's Claw's reputation as cover for more sophisticated operations. And you want me to find him? Eleanor concluded. Not just find him. Infiltrate his operation, identify his European contacts. Hollister placed the folder on the table. Your experience with Blackwood and his men gives you an opening few others would have. Reed straightened in his chair. Now wait just a minute. You're asking her to walk straight into a nest of killers. I'm offering her the opportunity to continue her father's mission, Hollister corrected. An opportunity I believe Colonel Hawkins was preparing her for all along. Eleanor opened the folder, scanning its contents. Detailed information on Blackwood's last known whereabouts, his known associates, suspected routes and safe houses. Everything. She would need to track him, and through him reach the European interests that had ordered her father's death. Santiago leaned forward, his young face troubled. Miss Hawkins, Eleanor, you don't have to do this. There are other ways to honor your father's memory. Eleanor looked up, meeting his concerned gaze with a calm one of her own. This isn't about honoring memories, Santiago. It's about finishing what he started. She closed the folder. I'll need 2 weeks to settle my affairs here, then I'll be ready. Hollister nodded, satisfaction evident despite his attempt at neutrality. Very well. We'll establish communication protocols before I return to Washington. As the men departed, Hollister to make arrangements, Reed and Santiago reluctantly returning to their duties in Prosperity, Eleanor remained at the table, her father's watch in her palm. The silver case caught the afternoon light, its engraved initials, a reminder of the legacy she now carried. You knew, didn't you? She murmured to the empty room. You always knew this day would come. In the growing silence, she could almost hear her father's voice. The best shot little hawk is the one they never see coming. 2 weeks later, a stagecoach departed Prosperity carrying a single female passenger. The locals knew only that Miss Eleanor Hawkins had sold her property to the Mendez family from Fort Benson and was traveling east to live with relatives. A sensible decision for a woman alone. Few questioned it. Fewer still would remember the quiet farm girl as anything other than a footnote in the brief excitement surrounding the Raven's Claw gang's capture and escape. Only Sheriff Reed and his young deputy stood watch as the stagecoach disappeared into the distance, carrying with it the woman who had forever changed their understanding of strength and deception. Think we'll see her again? Santiago asked quietly. Reed's expression was unreadable beneath his hat brim. Not as Eleanor Hawkins, we won't. I wonder who she'll become. The sheriff considered this, remembering the transformation he'd witnessed. From The demure farmer's daughter to the steel-eyed woman who had faced down killers without flinching. "Whoever she becomes," he said finally, "heaven help those who stand in her way." Miles away, as the stagecoach rattled toward the territorial line, Eleanor Hawkins, soon to be known by another name entirely, reviewed the contents of Hollister's folder one last time before committing them to memory. The quiet farm girl was, indeed, gone forever, replaced by something her father had spent decades carefully forging, a weapon of precision and purpose. The desert landscape streamed past the coach windows, harsh and beautiful in its stark contrasts. Eleanor touched the hidden holster at her side, feeling the reassuring shape of her father's Colt. In her luggage, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, the Winchester waited, not a memento, but a tool for the work ahead. Her father had trained her to hit any target, under any conditions. Now she had the most important target of all, justice for Ammon, who had served his country in shadows, who had died protecting truths too dangerous to be spoken aloud. As the coach crested a rise, Eleanor caught a final glimpse of Copper Valley in the distance, the place where she had played at being ordinary for so long. She allowed herself one moment of nostalgia before turning her gaze forward. Somewhere, to the south, Isaiah Blackwood gathered his men, unaware that he was now the hunted rather than the hunter. Beyond him waited the shadowy European interests that had orchestrated her father's murder, confident in their impunity. They would never see her coming. That was her father's final gift, the power of being underestimated. Eleanor Hawkins disappeared over the horizon that day, but the legacy of the sharpshooter who looked like a harmless farm girl was just beginning. Her story would continue in whispered legends of a woman who appeared when justice faltered, whose aim never wavered, and whose true identity remained her most closely guarded secret. As for the truth behind those legends, well, some stories are better left untold, at least until the right moment. After all, timing is everything, in shooting, in life, and especially in revenge. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.